Good afternoon, Tax Tip Tuesday 49 out of 52. I'm full of cold this week, so I tried to come up with a subject that would be short and sweet for Tax Tip Tuesday and decided to talk to you about the construction industry scheme, the CIS scheme. I then quickly realised that there's nothing short and sweet about the CIS scheme, so I will try my best to get through this without coughing and spluttering. Here goes. So, to act as a contractor, you must register with HMRC. You then need to submit a monthly CIS return telling HMRC about the payments that you have made to your subcontractors. Or you must submit a nil return if no subcontractors have been paid within a tax month. A tax month runs from the 6th to the 5th, and the returns are due for submission by the 19th each month. Now, HMRC are very hot on issuing penalties for late submission of CIS returns. I don't think I've ever seen one submitted late or not submitted that hasn't then received a £100 penalty very, very soon after the 19th. Each subcontractor needs verifying via HMRC before you pay them. So if you're doing it yourself, then you go on HMRC's website, unless you've got software that you can do this through. And the verification process is quite simple. You just put in the subcontractor's details and HMRC will come back telling you about their payment status, whether you should deduct tax at 30% or 20% from that subcontractor. Now, to work as a subcontractor, you don't actually have to tell HMRC that you are working under CIS, but it is advisable that you do so. If you're a self-employed individual, you do have to register as self-employed and make sure that you have a UTR, but you don't necessarily have to tell HMRC that you're working under CIS if you are already self-employed and you are newly working as a subcontractor. Although it is advisable that you do so, because if you don't, then your tax deduction rate will be 30% instead of 20%. If you're new to self-employment and you're going straight into working as a subcontractor, then on the same form that you fill out to register for self-assessment, there is a box to tick to tell HMRC that you're going to be working in the CIS industry. Sole traders, limited companies and partnerships can all work under the CIS scheme. Subcontractors have money deducted from their invoices by the contractor, and the contractor then pays the deductions over to HMRC. At the end of each tax year, for a sole trader, the accountant then calculates their tax and national insurance liability and offsets the deductions that have already been made by the contractors. This is all done via their self-assessment tax return. Self-employed subcontractors often, but not always, end up with tax refunds because the deductions taken by the contractors do not take into account the personal allowance, the NIC thresholds, or the expenses allowable as taxable deductions. However, it's not always a refund case. Sometimes people go into higher rate tax and that ends up that they'd still have a liability, or they could have income from other sources which has not yet been taxed. It all comes out in the wash via the tax return. It's usually a refund position for subcontractors, but not always. For a limited company, the CIS deductions suffered can be claimed back via the company's payroll scheme. HMRC will then pay back any deductions that the company has not been able to claim back via its pay-as-you-earn bill during the tax year. So, what kind of work is covered by the CIS scheme? Well, most construction and civil engineering work, which includes foundations, building work, demolition, repairs, decorating, alterations, installing systems for power, heat, light, ventilation, along with cleaning the inside of buildings after construction work has taken place. Some examples of work that is outside the scope for CIS is delivering materials, carpet fitting, scaffold supplies where there's no labour involved, architecture and surveying, making the materials used in construction, and services on site such as cafes or canteens, which are clearly not within the construction industry. As a side note, and something that I feel I should probably do a full Tax Tip Tuesday on, care should always be taken to determine the employment status of a worker to establish whether they should be classed as self-employed or actually whether they should be employed. There are some very clear guides on HMRC's website about this, and there is a test that you can kind of run through to determine self-employed/employed status. It's something which I often see a lot of confusion over, and in my years as an accountant, I've seen some very messy HMRC investigations where they've come down on a contractor and deemed that more than half their workforce should actually be employed rather than being paid as self-employed subcontractors. So that's something to bear in mind. As I say, I'll probably do another Tax Tip Tuesday all about that. If in doubt, as always, please speak to an accountant. Have a lovely rest of the day, everyone.